Aloha and namaste. This is Jivananda.
And this is Christy.
And we're here with Avatria, the Akashic Academy, and we're exploring another conversation about the Akashic Records and how they enhance, influence, and can more or less benefit what is going on in your life by taking a look.
And we want to share some of our own experiences with the Akasha and how diving into our past lifetimes and doing clearings on them has actually affected our lives, our own lives for the better. So we're going to share a little bit of, some personal
experiences.
Discoveries. Yeah.
Yeah, so, starting out, I want to ask Christy, what is something that you feel that we've worked on either recently or something that you've worked on maybe in the past that, really inspired a transformation that was significantly noticeable for you in your life?
I actually want to go a few years back and share something that I uncovered. And it was around the time when I was really first diving into my healing work. And I was really struggling with abundance at that time. And I had quit my crutch day job, as I call it. And all year long, I was just barely making rent and barely making rent. And then a friend of mine and we did a passive regression into the Akasha with the intention of uncovering why, my abundance was being blocked, especially the abundance of, facilitating healing work, doing energetic clearings.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's our kitty walking around. She wants to be part of the interview. And what was really interesting is we uncovered a past lifetime in India. And in that past lifetime, I came from a family that was very wealthy. And we didn't use that wealth for our own personal benefits solely. It was in a group consciousness where abundance was highly, honored, and people who were abundance actually used that abundance to help others. So it was a really philanthropic, lifestyle that we lived. And I had a beautiful husband, I had beautiful children, a beautiful family, really good relationship with family members. And then my sister fell ill, and all the abundance we had couldn't save her life. And it devastated me. It created such a trauma in my field. And I kept praying and praying that lifetime for a solution. And none of my skills that I had, none of the skills my family had or that were accessible at that time actually healed her. So she ended up transitioning at a very young age. And I made a commitment to rather have the gift of healing than to have abundance. And you saw
kind of a separation there between the two.
Exactly, because my money wasn't able to heal her. And that created that belief system that money can't heal, so I'd rather have the gift of healing than actually having money accessible
yeah, that makes
to
sense,
me.
yeah.
And that prayer or that, intention became like an oath,
kind of
commitment.
A commitment, yeah.
That, I was able to help people, I was able to help myself. That gift was present. But the gift of abundance and prosperity was completely blocked. And we did a clearing on it where, we kind of merged these two things so both could exist in my life together, that I could have the gift of feeling, but I could also experience abundance the way I experienced it then, which was a really beautiful way, by the way. And I think it took about 2.5 months, and I really felt that internal shift happening. It went like, something shifted in me. And I knew in that moment that program was completely gone. So it took a little bit of integration time.
So did you focus specifically on the trauma, or did you focus on the commitment that you had made where you felt like life, you could either do one or the other? Abundance wasn't unified with the healing energy.
Yeah, it was that either or decision. I can't have either this or that. I couldn't have both.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and clearing that commitment or that oath or obligation, whatever you want to call it, that contract, then literally opened up a way for new abundance to come in. And a year later, I wrote my 30-day abundance program.
Awesome.
So yeah, that was, and it was something where it was actually very visible on the physical world.
Exactly.
Not just something that I felt internally, but something that was literally being reflected back to me through the changes I was experiencing.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
It's a very powerful story. And, this is what we're wanting to share with our audience is, how working with the Akasha can really, allow you to uncover things that you have no idea are there and is very specific to, something that you might find yourself engaged in currently, and you're having, challenges with being able to put the pieces together, because if you're only working with that physical arena, it's not addressing the issue. It's only like, touching the leaves of the tree when the leaves and the information is all being grown up from the roots.
Exactly,
that's beautiful.
Yeah, and who would have known that I had that commitment? So it was not until I actually dove into the Akashic Records and uncovered that lifetime that I was able to resolve it.
Yeah. Yeah. That brings me to a journey that I did for myself one time on the same topic of abundance. When I was feeling, at that time in my life, I was I had a very specific relationship with abundance, and I had a very specific relationship with what I felt was worthy of being exchanged for the amount of abundance I received. And it was very much a physical relationship. And what I did is, at that time in my life, I was very much involved with physical labor. It was very much of a labor kind of job that I was working with and had for, basically ever since I, grew into the work field, starting around age 16. I realized that my relationship was very physical labor oriented. And I felt like I had to give a lot of physical energy, and I would only get a small amount back. And there was some part of me that I could feel was kind of limiting what I would allow myself to receive. And so when I went into the Akasha, I found that I had a slave contract.
Interesting. Yeah.
And I feel that, the slave contract is something that is very relevant for all of us, because we have been here for many, many lifetimes. And, the slavery mentality, those relationships are very prevalent in human history. And we all have probably carried to some degree a relationship with slavery. And the lifetime that I went back to was one, it was in like Egyptian times, where I was, committed to working, very, very strenuously and intensely to create and produce a very small, quote unquote, living, or means or ration for myself and my family. And
you were doing physical labor over there as well?
It was very physical labor, yeah. It was moving, it was like moving stones and working with stones and things. And so when I was able to go in and really analyze that, and I kind of uncovered that particular lifetime, I realized that, the moment that I was doing that Akashic reading, I was also doing hard physical labor that didn't really amount to much, and once again, it was
the same pattern,
the direct reflection that, here I am acquiring just a little bit of means to survive, and that's it. When, in my heart and in my being, I felt, this isn't what I want, and this doesn't align with who I feel I am, and it has nothing to do with what I feel I'm capable of, but for some reason, I have this program where, when I want to get paid for something, I was going into physical labor that was, paying me very minimally for that amount of energy. So
that's interesting, yeah.
Yeah. So being able to go into that lifetime, process the emotions, sort of witness some of the other more specific details around my relationship of why, I accepted that in that lifetime, I was able to clear that energy and reclaim the empowerment of calling back my truth self. And being able to, go forth with that trust from that point. And, everything obviously changed from there on.
And, we often talk how certain belief structures are being created through the experiences we have in past lifetimes and the stories that we live. When you went into the Akasha at that time, did you find specific beliefs that kept you in that labor energy, that having to hard work, struggle
Yes.
energy, limited abundance energy? And
Exactly. Yeah.
And wait, is there something you want to maybe share with us?
Yeah, well, for an example, I know that I was telling myself that in that slave mentality, it was very much, I'm not worthy, right? I don't deserve, I don't deserve the life that, I don't deserve peace. I don't deserve happiness. I don't deserve anything other than survival.
Yeah.
And so I was very attached to the only thing that I could allow or accept was survival, and the means that then came in to cover just my bare necessities. That's all I accepted because that's all I felt I was worthy of, right? And and so that, more or less identified other aspects of that particular lifetime, and there's ones that went previous to that as well, where I had, accepted some form of self-defeat, or I had allowed myself to surrender in some way to a kingdom, or to a hierarchy,
like that whole inferiority, second class energy,
self-servient, energy, the servant role, and so. Yeah, that was one specific belief. Any that are coming to mind for you that that you worked on in regards to clearing your abundance?
My abundance? What was really interesting, I had to really work on the German group consciousness beliefs, which, we know that even, these beliefs that I, learned in this lifetime are just a reflection of past lifetime beliefs. And, and kind of when you talk about having, all that physical labor and having to work hard, but only being able to make so and so much money was very similar to what I was holding. And it was, for me, it was not necessarily just with abundance, but it was always that mentality of having to work hard to achieve what I wanted to achieve. Or having to work hard in order to be accepted. Having to work hard in order to feel my life had value. I personally had value. Like what was, the beliefs that came up was really that the hard labor and even having to go through struggle and challenges and overcoming them was my proof of my own worthiness. Like the more I struggled, the more I suffered. And the more I conquered the challenges, the worthier I was.
Right,
And,
because there was almost a reverse belief that you created to counteract the one that was in place, inhibiting you from just being able to be that.
Exactly. And the moment I actually cleared it, things, they started more flowing in my life. I felt like I didn't have to put in all this effort in order to accomplish something. I didn't have to have all these challenges come up where I then had to go and find solutions to the problems.
Right.
It was more like, okay, this is what you want to do, let's open this door for you. And certain things even falling into place without me even having, so to say, to do something for it. I mean, we're doing something for it, but not actively. It was more energetically that I had to show up, and things were coming into my life with ease and grace.
Yeah, you kind of energetically initiate that arena, and then the physical follows suit to that.
Yeah, but I have an interesting story since we're talking about, the whole slave mentality. And I feel like, again, Avachians, as we're looking at the Akasha, it's been so strongly imprinted into our fields, and slave lifetimes can show up in so many different ways. It might not be like you're a slave tied to chains. It might more be that slave mentality of, what you were even showing, that hard labor mentality. And it was actually interesting. I was working a job, and the person I was working for wasn't very kind. Quite the opposite. He was very mean. And he was also someone who, whenever he made a mistake, he would blame everyone around him. He would not take responsibility.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. And I got to a point where I was going into work and I was feeling resentful about the job and my life and having to show up. And I felt it in my stomach that if I didn't make a change, I would probably create some kind of illness in order to get me out of that situation. It was like I literally got that download one day. So what we did is we went into the Akasha, And we found this lifetime where I was actually a black slave on a plantation, and he was the slave owner.
Okay.
And we still were playing that story in this lifetime, where he felt he owned me and he could do with me whatever he pleased to. He didn't have to follow any rules. And it was also interesting because he kept changing the rules pretty much by the week, according to how it served him. So I constantly had to adjust to new rules at my job, which was very confusing. And you know, again, there was a lot of yelling and screaming, which was exactly what had happened in that slave lifetime. So I was still showing up as the slave, and he was still showing up as that slave owner, so to say. And when we cleared that energy out of my field, and even, you know, maybe even, I can't even remember all the details. I think I remember clearing some slave contracts where he bought me and then had me as a slave on the plantation. So we cleared all these beliefs and contracts out of my field. He treated me completely different.
You saw a flip in the energy, huh?
Yeah, and I remember him making a mistake and yelling at someone else, and I actually went in and I stepped up and I said, no, this is actually what really happened. He's like, no, everything is okay. It wasn't your fault. I take full responsibility for that. But he couldn't say that or take accountability until I actually changed my programs. And what was really beautiful, the whole result of this, I actually eventually left that company and went through a different one, and that new employer was a completely different person who was always saying, are you okay? Do you need anything? Can I buy you a juice? Do you need a break? Just sit down and have a short break. You've been working so hard. I want you to take a short break before you continue working.
That's beautiful.
So it was a completely, you know, even though
radical
the old
transformation.
Even though the old, you know, employer kind of changed. Like after a while, I couldn't stay in that energy anymore because he was still treating everyone else. But I was offered a different opportunity in a completely different environment where I went in. I felt just like serene and at peace, and there was harmony. It was really, really beautiful.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, you know, and you know, even for us as Akashic practitioners, it's like, it's so unlimited, you know. There's so many lifetimes that we've all lived. There's so many different patterns and so many different experiences and so many different circumstances and situations that we, you know, found ourselves in, that kind of are tying a little knot of energy and keeping something fixed there that isn't true for us. And, you know, the reason that these emotions and energies get fixed is because at the time when they happen, we weren't maybe mature enough in our own being to be able to process that, right? To be able to allow the universal energy that was coming in to us, you know, at that experience, to process through. It maybe was too traumatic, or it was just too intensive an experience, and so we stop it, or we block it, or we shift it, or we make a commitment, or so on and so forth, and that acts as like a little energetic knot that then is placed there, and then we pass on. And we reincarnate into a new body, not realizing that we have all of these knots that we've tied, restricting our energy, right? And so it's beautiful, you know, personally, when you go in and you experience the untying of that knot and the energy frees itself, and you notice how, you know, the physical aspects that you were, you know, that relate to that particular energy start to open and flow and inspire and influence you in a different way because you've opened it. So it's amazing.
Yeah, and what I'm curious about, when you talked about that past lifetime in Egypt, where you said there were other lifetimes that were really similar, was there anything else that you found where you saw that as a pattern for many, many incarnations, where you showed up with that labor mentality?
Absolutely. You know, and you know what Christy and I have discovered is that going into the Akasha, you can see multiple lifetimes on one particular topic. But the key is to really access the root lifetime, or the original lifetime that pattern first appeared. Yeah. Because when you go to that lifetime, that's the origin of it. And once it was created and has never been resolved until maybe this lifetime, then there's this lifetime, this lifetime, this lifetime, this lifetime, and this lifetime that you most likely created the same scenario. And so, what Christy's asking me is, did I notice a pattern? And absolutely, I found myself in another lifetime where I was in a kingdom under some, rulership. And I was working as like a blacksmith, creating tools for the kingdom. And I was forced in a way to kind of surrender myself and my service to the kingdom and work for them. Once again, in limiting conditions and limiting freedom, because they needed my services. So they sort of enslaved me through threat of my family and other things and so on and so forth. So once again, I remanifested that same scenario of having to work hard and not receive the abundance that I deserved because of the circumstance that I and the beliefs that I was currently, carrying still from that original lifetime. So, what's interesting is when you clear the root lifetime, it blasts through all of your timeline, all of your time frame, and starts to illuminate and liberate you from that restraining energy. So,
and you felt like that Egypt lifetime was the root lifetime?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I do. Yep, exactly. It was a root lifetime where I consciously accepted enslavement. I allowed myself to kind of go there and be suppressed willingly in a way. Even though I did feel threatened for my life, I still made that agreement to go along with it. And, not until now. That was quite a few years ago that I cleared that one, but it just goes to show how long it stays with you until you're unable to, until you're able to clear it out. So, yeah, I think that that this is basically what we're wanting to share with you. Just giving you a little bit of a deeper insight around how the Akashic Records, can help you bring clarity and transformation into your life.
Yeah, and how easy it actually is when you uncover these patterns, because, it consciously, logically does not make sense at all. But when you dive into the Akasha and you see these stories and how they're repeating themselves, like Jivananda said, through many lifetimes into this lifetime, all of a sudden it does make sense, because you're seeing the beliefs, you're seeing the stories, and then you change them, and then this life continues and becomes a different story.
So, anyway, thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Thank you all for tuning in, and we look forward to connecting with you further as this beautiful life and the Akashic world continues to unfold.
There you go. Namaste, our patrons.
Aloha.